And now, marine weather around Alaska. Happy New Year! I'm National Weather Service meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska marine weather on this first day of 2024. And I want to start out with an impressive satellite image that was provided by the Fairbanks Forecast Office. We can see on the polar orbiting satellite the ice cracking along the Beaufort, Upper Chukchi Sea here off the northwest coast especially. This is Utqiagvik, and then as we go down Wainwright to Point Lay and then Point Hope and Cape Lisburne. Further east, we run along the coast, Prudhoe Bay on over to Kaktovik. With these strong easterly winds that have developed, we expect more of the ice to shift and crack like that. And the winds are just beginning to set in. Strongest winds right now here are around Point Lay, where there are blizzard conditions, a lot of that snow being provided blowing in off of the north slope. And as we go through this Monday night into Tuesday, the stronger winds are going to back build across the Arctic coast and then all the way over to Kaktovik by the time we get into tomorrow afternoon, evening. So we expect widespread, long duration blizzard conditions, ground blizzard conditions with dangerously cold wind chills as cold as 50 below. Very dangerous, making travel impossible or extremely dangerous. So exercise caution coming up here in this week, first week of the new year. Looking at the ice, it's rather extensive, and with these strong winds, don't be surprised some polynyas try to open up. However, it's quite cold, so the tendency is for that open water to quickly refreeze, but again, that'll be the case down anywhere along the northwest and western coast. We have very strong winds funneling between the Brooks Range and Alaska Range, easterly winds in excess of 50, even gusting upwards of 60 miles an hour at times. Now here, along areas of the southwest, west coast out of Norton Sound, those east winds will continue, and the ice could try to pull back a little toward the west as a result of the strong wind flow. We have a very deep, intense low south of the Aleutians right now. It's going to bottom out around 935 millibars as we go into tomorrow afternoon. So by late tonight, early on Tuesday, a 940 low is going to be lifting out of the North Pacific toward the central eastern Aleutians. Weakening low here south of the Alaska Peninsula, trough up through the lower Gulf. Notice the pressure gradient increasing across the mainland. Big Arctic high, 1045, 1046 high is going to build southeastward into northwest and north central Canada. By Tuesday afternoon, we have a 935 low situated just south of the eastern Aleutians with this occluded front wrapped around it. A lot of winds along this, though the most intense winds are going to be on the southern sector of this storm, so that's good news. We're not going to see hurricane force winds. Otherwise, with a storm like this, that's very possible, but that's just the way this one ended up evolving and configuring. But active weather will be along this front. We'll have, again, the pressure gradient across the interior leans to very strong easterly winds. They are along, and especially north of the Yukon Valley. And by Wednesday, the occluded front, the low starts to slowly fill and still quite deep there and through the lower southeastern Bering Sea, just north of Dutch Harbor and approaching the north side of the Alaska Peninsula. The high slips down here toward Great Slave Lake in northwest Canada. Front continues across the Gulf, impacting the Gulf Coast into the Panhandle with some additional wind and precipitation, but not as intense as the winds down south of the low center. But nevertheless, active weather, very active weather. There'll be areas of blowing snow across the interior with very cold wind chills, and then in through these marine zones, you'll see the stronger winds associated with this storm. So across the Panhandle Tuesday, look for the inner channels. Southeast winds 20 knots around Ketchikan, Metlakatla, waves 6 feet. Northwest winds 20-25 knots with gusts to 35 knots there, central channels, Stevens Passage. Waves 4 to 5 feet, and then the outer coast, generally southeast to east winds, 20 to 25 knots, but upwards of 35 knot gales west of Gustavus and west of Yakutat toward Cape Suckling with waves 15 to as high as 19 feet there off of Cape Suckling. And then for Wednesday, southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, middle lower channels, waves 4-5 feet. Lynn Canal, northwest winds 20 knots, 4-foot waves. Outer coast, look for generally southeast winds to 30 knots, and then they turn easterly to 40 knots. Cape Suckling with waves as high as in excess of 20 feet there up along the north central Gulf once you get out a little bit. And looking at the winds across the northwestern Gulf, 30-knot easterly winds outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance and within Prince William Sound. Waves 6 feet, Prince William Sound. But as we go down the length of Cook Inlet, winds increase to 35 to 40-knot gales, waves 9 to 11 feet through lower Cook Inlet, 40-knot easterly gales there north and east of Kodiak City with 16-foot waves. For Wednesday, east winds continue, 35-knot gales common in the open water or nearshore waters here of the Gulf along the Kenai coastline and up in through Hinchinbrook Entrance with waves 15, 17 feet. Southeast to easterly 35-knot gales, waves as high as 18 feet off the shore there of Kodiak Island, and 9-foot waves within the entrance there of Cook Inlet. Now along the Alaska Peninsula up through Kodiak Island, we're looking at 35 to 40-knot gales as high as 45 knots south of Kodiak and east of Chicknick, because this is kind of where the most intense portion of that front will be gradually lifting north and northeastward. Waves 15 feet or so on the North Pacific side, 6 to 10 feet, highest north of Cold Bay on the Bering side. And then for Wednesday, the winds really pour in on the south of Kodiak Island and on the North Pacific side of the peninsula. Southeasterly gales of 40 knots south of Kodiak Island and off of Sand Point, waves near 20 feet. Southeast 35-knot gales outside of the ice-covered areas of Bristol Bay and north of Cold Bay with waves running 5 to as high as 9 feet. Eastern Aleutians on Tuesday, so that intense low is just south there of Nikolsky and Unalaska. We expect easterly to northeasterly storm force winds of 50 knots. Waves on the North Pacific side could build up to 20 to 23 feet. On the Bering side, 14 to maybe 19 feet. Winds fall off western Aleutians, north-northwest 25 knots west of Kiska. And then for Wednesday, in the wake of that low, as that low passes up north of Unalaska, we expect winds eastern Aleutians westerly 30 to 35 knots, but then 45-knot northwesterly gales across the central Aleutians, and waves 18 to 22 feet on the North Pacific side, and 14 to as high as 20 feet there as you get west of Adak. Across the southwest coast, brisk offshore flow. 45-knot east winds out of Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, 35-knot gales out of Norton Sound, the lower Yukon Delta. Some of this ice will want to push westward. 40-knot gales there around St. Paul, St. George. And same thing on Wednesday, we see a continuation of very strong easterly offshore flow, 35 to 40-knot gales along the coast line here of the southwest and western central areas of the coast. Which again will likely help to push some of that lead ice further westward. Now across the north, south of the Bering Strait, look for easterly 30-knot, 35-knot winds through the Chukchi Sea, 35-knot easterly gales, and then 35 to 40-knot gales extending along the northwest Arctic coast to 30 knots there at Kaktovik, and that's what's going to help really drive the ground blizzard conditions, especially here along the northwest coast. And then as we go to Wednesday, winds are even stronger. 40 knots along the Arctic coast, Utqiagvik to Kaktovik. This area here would have potentially some notable ground blizzard conditions, depending on how much snow there is to work with the snow that's along and parallel to the coastline. But here through the lower Chukchi Sea, 35-knot easterly gales, northeast winds to 30 knots through the Bering Strait and down on the north side of St. Lawrence and out of Norton Sound. So again, very active weather pattern. Be very careful with the cold temperatures. Wind chills could be dangerously cold in areas of the Arctic coast to 50 below zero. Winds could gust as high as 60, 70 miles an hour in some areas. Winds down through this way could be 50, 60 miles an hour, especially coming out of Kotzebue Sound. So dangerous conditions will prevail for a long duration event that'll take us through the entire midweek and could last through Thursday and even linger into Friday in some areas, especially along the eastern Arctic coast. So stay safe and have a happy new year.